Story 1. Church of the Hollow Children. The phone screen went black. Dead black. Not the kind of black you get when the battery dies. The kind that swallows light whole. Marcus stared at his iPhone, watching his reflection warp in the dark glass. 3 bars of signal. Full battery. The live stream had just cut out mid-sentence. Right as he was telling his viewers about the children, this drawing still chalked on the chapel walls. Hey guys, sorry about that. He tapped the screen, hoping to reconnect. Nothing. The Louisiana humidity pressed against his skin like wet fabric. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees around the abandoned church, creating shadows that moved wrong in his peripheral vision. This was supposed to be easy content. Urban exploration. American horror at its most basic. A creepypasta come to life in the middle of nowhere. The Church of the Hollow Children stood before him like a broken tooth against the darkening sky. Its white paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing gray wood underneath that looked diseased. The steeple tilted at an angle that hurt to look at. 18 children had vanished from this place in 1952. The story went that they were attending Sunday school when a fire broke out. But no bodies were ever found. No ashes, no bones, just empty clothes scattered across the pews like shed skin. Marcus had driven 6 hours from New Orleans to get here. His YouTube channel needed something big, something viral. The algorithm demanded fresh horror, and abandoned places in Louisiana delivered. The supernatural seemed to pool in the swamplands like stagnant water. He tried the live stream again. Still nothing. The phone felt cold in his hands, colder than it should have been in the oppressive heat. Behind him, his car looked impossibly far away, though he had parked just 50 yards from the chapel entrance. The gravel road seemed to stretch and warp, like he was looking at it through water. Okay, recording locally then. His voice sounded thin in the thick air. He switched to video mode and held the phone up. Hey everyone, Marcus here with another episode of Southern Scares. I am standing outside what locals call the Church of the Hollow Children. As you can see behind me, he turned the camera toward the building. Through the phone screen, the chapel looked different, bigger. The shadows were deeper, more defined. And there, in the windows, was that movement? Marcus lowered the phone and looked directly at the church. Empty windows stared back at him like dead eyes. But when he raised the camera again, something shifted in the rightmost window. Just for a second, like curtains moving in a room that should have no curtains. Did you guys see that? He checked the recording. The red dot blinked steadily. At least the phone was still working, even if he couldn't T-stream. I could swear I saw something in the window. Probably just my imagination playing tricks. But his hands were shaking now. The kind of involuntary tremor that comes when your body knows something your mind hasn't accepted yet. Every urban explorer learned to trust their gut. The feeling that whispered, "Leave now," had saved more lives than any equipment ever could. The smart thing would be to get back in the car, drive to New Orleans, edit together what footage he had and call it a day. His subscribers would understand. Most of them were Americans who grew up on ghost stories and urban legends. They knew the difference between manufactured scares and real dread. Instead, Marcus walked toward the chapel. The wooden steps creaked under his feet. Each board sounded like it was crying out in pain. The front door hung open, revealing darkness so complete it seemed solid. He pulled out his phone, his flashlight, and shined it inside. The beam seemed to stop just a few feet into the building, as if the darkness was thick enough to block light. Going inside now, he said to the camera. The door was already open, so technically I'm not breaking and entering. This is abandoned property, and I'm not vandalizing anything. He always said that part for legal reasons. YouTube's algorithm favored creators who stayed out of jail. The first step inside felt like walking into a mouth. The air was wrong. Too still, too warm, with an underlying sweetness that reminded him of flowers left too long in water. His flashlight beam swept across the interior, revealing wooden pews arranged in neat rows. A pulpit stood at the far end, shadowed and imposing. And there, scattered across the pews, were drawings. Children. Just drawings, done in what looked like chalk or maybe crayon. Stick figures holding hands. Houses with too many windows. Animals with too many teeth. They covered every surface. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling where tiny hands could never have reached. This is incredible, Marcus whispered, his voice barely registering on the phone, this microphone. The drawings are everywhere. They look fresh, but this place has been abandoned for over 70 years. He moved deeper into the chapel, filming as he went. The pews were arranged in perfect rows, as if someone still maintained this place. No dust, No debris. Even the spiderwebs looked intentional, hanging in geometric patterns that seemed too organized for nature. That's when he noticed the smell. Underneath the sickly sweet flower scent was something else, something that made his stomach clench. It was the smell of his childhood. That particular mix of fear, sweat, and unwashed clothes that clung to kids who spent too much time hiding from things they couldn't name. The atmosphere in here is incredible, he said to the camera, though his voice had dropped to a whisper. You can feel the history, the tragedy. It's like the air itself remembers what happened here. A sound came from somewhere in the darkness behind him. Soft, rhythmic, like small feet walking across wooden floors. Marcus spun around, his phone, his light cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just empty pews and children, his drawings that seemed to shift and writhe in the moving beam. Did you hear that? He checked the phone screen. Still recording. I definitely heard footsteps. Small footsteps. The sound came again, closer this time, and with it, something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Giggling, children, it's laughter, soft and sweet and completely wrong in this dead place. Okay, that is not normal. Marcus backed toward the door, but when he turned around, the entrance was gone. Just more pews stretching into darkness. That is not possible. He spun in a slow circle, his light beams sweeping the chapel. Everywhere he looked, he saw the same thing. Rows of pews, covered in children, his drawings, extending into shadow. No walls, no door, no way out. The giggling grew louder. This has to be some kind of optical illusion, he said, but his voice cracked on the words. Churches are built in specific shapes. There has to be a wall somewhere. He walked forward, toward where the door should have been. His light illuminated pew after pew. But no matter how far he walked, he never seemed to get anywhere. The drawings on the wooden surfaces grew more elaborate as he moved. The stick figures had faces now, wide, staring eyes and smiles full of too many teeth. And then he saw them, small handprints pressed against the inside of the pews. Dozens of them, as if children had been reaching up from underneath the wooden benches. The prints were chalky white against the dark wood, and they covered every surface he could see. The handprints, he whispered, they were everywhere. It's like the kids were trying to climb out of something. The giggling stopped. In the sudden silence, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. His breath came in short, sharp gasps that his microphone picked up as static. He stood perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to make any sound that might bring back that horrible laughter. That's when he noticed his shadow. In the light from his phone, his shadow stretched across the floor behind him. But it wasn't alone. Smaller shadows clustered around it, child-sized silhouettes that reached up toward his shadow with tiny grasping hands. Marcus looked behind him, nothing but empty air and darkness. He looked down at the floor. The shadows were still there, still reaching, still trying to touch his shadow with their small, desperate fingers. This isn't real, he said. Shadows, Don. It worked that way. This is just stress, or carbon monoxide, or... One of the small shadows broke away from the others and moved. Not with his light, not following any natural law of physics, but independently, crawling across the floor toward his feet. Marcus ran. He didn't care about the footage anymore, didn't care about his subscribers or the algorithm or going viral. He just ran, his feet pounding against wooden floors that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. The phone's light bounced wildly, creating a strobe effect that made the children's drawings appear to move and dance on the walls. Behind him, the giggling started again, not from one source, but from everywhere at once. The sound of dozens of children laughing with delight, as if they were playing the best game in the world. As if they had found a new friend. Marcus, his foot hit something soft. He stumbled, nearly dropping the phone, and looked down. A child's shoe, small, white, with a patent leather surface that reflected his light. It looked like it had been placed there moments ago. More shoes appeared in his beam. Tiny sneakers, little boots, children's sandals, all arranged in neat pairs as if their owners had simply stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. The missing children, Marcus gasped. These are their shoes. The giggling grew louder, more excited. It echoed off walls he couldn't see, bounced back from a ceiling that seemed impossibly high. And underneath the laughter, he heard something else. Whispers, children's voices, soft and sweet. all talking at once. He couldn't make out individual words, but the tone was clear. They were happy, excited. They had been waiting so long for someone to play with. Marcus forced himself to stop running. His chest burned, and his legs felt like jelly, but panic would get him killed. He had to think, had to figure out what was happening and how to get out. Okay, he said to the camera, his voice shaking. I am clearly in some kind of psychological state. Stress hallucinations. Maybe. The important thing is to stay calm and find the exit. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. This wasn't a hallucination. This was something else entirely. Something that belonged in the worst kind of American horror story. The kind that started as urban legends and ended with people disappearing forever. The whispers grew clearer. He could make out words now. Play with us. Stay with us. Don, leave us alone. The voices were coming from the pews around him. Marcus shined his light toward the nearest bench and nearly dropped the phone. Small hands pressed against the wood from the inside, as if the pews were hollow and filled with children trying to claw their way out. The hands were pale and thin, with fingers too long for any human child. They scratched and pressed against the wood, leaving those chalky white handprints he had seen earlier. Please, one of the voices whispered, clearer than the rest. They've been waiting so long. 70 years, said another. So cold down here, so dark. Marcus backed away from the pews, but no matter which direction he moved, there were always more benches, more small hands pressing from within, more whispered pleas for him to stay and play. What happened to you? He asked, though every instinct screamed at him not to engage. What happened in 1952? The giggling stopped abruptly. The whispers faded. For a moment, the chapel was completely silent except for Marcus's ragged breathing. Then a new voice spoke, older than the others. Adult, female. We were teaching them about sacrifice, the voice said. About giving yourself completely to something greater. About how sometimes, to serve the light, you have to become one with the darkness. Marcus's light found the pulpit at the far end of the chapel. A woman stood behind it, tall and gaunt, wearing a white dress that might once have been a wedding gown. Her face was hidden in shadow, but her hands gripped the edges of the wooden podium with fingers that were too long, too thin, too pale. Sunday school, she continued, her voice carrying easily through the impossible space. Such an innocent name for what we really taught them. How to let go, how to slip between the spaces in the world, how to become something new. You not real, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. You part of whatever is happening to me. The woman laughed, and it was nothing like the children. It was giggling. This was the sound of wind through dead trees, of water draining from a bathtub, of air escaping from lungs that would never breathe again. Real is such a limited concept, she said. These children are more real now than they ever were in life. They've become part of something eternal, something hungry. The hands in the pews pressed harder against the wood. Marcus could hear the boards creaking, starting to splinter under the pressure. They want you to join them, the woman said. They've been so lonely. It's been decades since anyone visited. Decades since they had a chance to share their gift. What gift? Marcus asked, though he didn't want to know the answer. The gift of becoming hollow, she whispered. Of letting go of everything that makes you heavy. Your fears, your doubts, your memories, your flesh. Everything that keeps you trapped in one shape, one form, one reality. The first pew cracked. A small hand pushed through the splintered wood, followed by a thin arm that bent in too many places. The skin was paper white and covered in chalk dust. The fire in 1952, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him like ice water. It wasn't an accident. Oh no, the woman agreed. It was a celebration, a transformation. We taught them to burn away everything unnecessary until only the essential remained. Pure spirit, pure hunger, pure need. More pews began to crack. Thin arms pushed through the wood, followed by small heads with two wide eyes and smiles full of teeth that had grown sharp and pointed in the decades since their transformation. Marcus ran again. This time he didn't aim for where the door should be. Instead, he ran toward the pulpit, toward the woman in white, because sometimes the only way out was through. She watched him approach with what might have been amusement. Up close, he could see that her face was wrong, just like the children's. Her features had been worn smooth by time, like a stone polished by decades of running water. Her eyes were hollow sockets that seemed to contain their own darkness. You can leave, she said simply. This place exists between spaces now. Between what is and what was. Between the living world and somewhere else entirely. The only way out is to become like us. There's always a way out, Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Every ghost story has rules. Every supernatural situation has logic. Supernatural, she repeated, tasting the word. Such a clinical term for something so beautiful. You Americans love your categories, Don, do you? Your explanations. Your rational responses to irrational situations. Behind him, the children had begun to emerge from their wooden prisons. He could hear them giggling again, their voices layered over each other like a chorus of nightmares. They were free now, and they were hungry for companionship. The truth is simpler than your creepypasta stories, the woman continued. We needed a way to keep the children safe, to preserve them exactly as they were, full of wonder and innocence and joy. So we made them into something that could never grow old, never become corrupt, never leave us. You made them into ghosts, Marcus said. We made them into possibility, she corrected. Into potential energy waiting to be released. All they need is someone to share it with, someone to help them remember what it feels like to be alive. The small hands touched Marcus' legs. The children had surrounded him, their chalky fingers leaving white prints on his jeans. They looked up at him with those two wide eyes, and their smiles were full of hope and hunger. Play with us, they whispered in unison. Stay with us. Help us remember. Marcus looked down at his phone. Still recording. The red light blinked steadily, documenting everything. His subscribers would never see this footage. No one would. But somehow, that didn't matter anymore. What if I say no? He asked the woman. Then you all wander these pews forever, she said. Like we do, like we have for 70 years, waiting for someone else to find this place, waiting for another chance. And if I say yes, then you understand what they learned, that the real horror isn't being trapped, it's being forgotten. It's fading away until no one remembers you existed at all. The children, the grip tightened on his legs. Their chalky fingers were cold, but underneath the chill, he could feel something else. Warmth, life, a desperate need for connection that transcended death and time and the boundaries between worlds. Marcus looked at his phone one last time. The recording had been going for 47 minutes. His battery was down to 30%. In a few hours, his friends would wonder why he hadn't returned their calls. In a few days, someone might come looking for him. But by then, it would be too late. The American dream, he said quietly, thinking of all the urban legends he had explored, all the ghost stories he had investigated. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what happens when happiness becomes something else entirely? When it becomes need? The woman smiled, and for a moment, her face looked almost human. Then you learn the difference between existing and being alive, she said. Marcus felt the children, his hands growing warmer. Their whispers became a song, wordless and beautiful and terrible. The chapel around him seemed to pulse with life, with possibility, with the promise of never being alone again. He thought about his YouTube channel, his subscribers, the algorithm that demanded fresh content, new scares, bigger reactions. The endless hunger for more views, more engagement, more validation from strangers on the internet. Maybe being hollow wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a person. Maybe it was just another kind of fullness. The phone slipped from Marcus's fingers and clattered to the floor. The camera kept recording. The lens pointed up at the ceiling where children's drawings moved and shifted in patterns that hurt to look at directly. On the small screen, viewers would have seen Marcus's face change. Would have watched his features grow smooth and pale, his eyes deepen into hollow sockets that contained their own darkness. Would have heard his voice join the children, this wordless song, adding a deeper note to their eternal chorus. But the live stream had cut out hours ago. The phone recorded everything, but no one would ever see it. In a few hours, the battery would die, and the footage would be lost forever. Just like Marcus himself, just like the 18 children who had vanished from this place in 1952. The Church of the Hollow Children stood empty in the Louisiana swampland, waiting. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees, creating shadows that moved wrong in the fading daylight. Inside, chalk drawings covered every surface, and small handprints pressed against the wooden pews. Somewhere in the darkness, children giggled and played their eternal games. And somewhere else, a new voice had joined their chorus, deeper than the others, but just as hollow, just as hungry for connection. just as desperate to be remembered. The gravel road stretched away from the chapel, leading back to the world of the living. But it was empty now. No car, no tire tracks, nothing to suggest that anyone had ever been there at all. In the morning, the sun would rise over the abandoned church. Birds would sing in the cypress trees. The world would continue turning, indifferent to the small tragedy that had played out in the space between spaces. And Marcus, his YouTube channel would show him his last active 18 hours ago. His friends would assume he was busy editing footage. His family would think he had gotten caught up in another project. It would be days before anyone realized he was gone, weeks before they started looking, but they would never find the Church of the Hollow Children. It existed now only for those who needed to find it, those who were hollow enough inside to understand its gift. The algorithm would keep suggesting Marcus' old videos to viewers who had forgotten to unsubscribe. His American horror stories would continue to entertain people who had no idea that horror was anything more than entertainment. And in the swamplands of Louisiana, in a chapel that existed between what is and what was, children, this laughter echoed through the darkness. Waiting, always waiting, for the next visitor to find their way home. Story 2. Sleepover game gone wrong. The mirror cracked at exactly midnight. Sarah Chen heard the glass split from across the bathroom, a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. She spun around to see spider web fractures spreading across the surface, distorting her reflection into fragments. Behind her, Emma Rodriguez was still chanting, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." This was supposed to be fun. A stupid sleepover game for 13-year-old girls who wanted to scare themselves silly and then giggle about it over pizza and soda. But something had gone wrong the moment Emma started speaking the words. Sarah's suburban home in Naperville, Illinois had never felt dangerous before. Two-story colonial on Maple Street. Manicured lawn, basketball hoop in the driveway. The kind of place where the worst thing that happened was Mrs. Patterson, his cat getting stuck in a tree. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt supernatural. Emma had been acting strange all week. Quiet in class, distant during lunch. When Sarah asked what was wrong, Emma just shrugged and said she had been having weird dreams. Dreams about mirrors and dark rooms and voices that whispered her name. Now Emma stood in front of Sarah's bathroom mirror with her eyes closed, chanting the words that every American kid learned on playgrounds and at sleepovers. The ritual that was supposed to summon a ghost but never actually worked. Except tonight it was working. The temperature in the bathroom dropped 20 degrees in 10 seconds. Sarah could see her breath in the air, small puffs of vapor that should not exist in a heated house in October. Emma's voice was changing. What had started as a normal 13-year-old girl, his voice was getting deeper, rougher, like someone else was speaking through her throat. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. The words echoed off the bathroom tiles, but the echo sounded wrong. It came from inside the mirror instead of bouncing off the walls. Sarah wanted to stop this, wanted to grab Emma's shoulders and shake her awake from whatever trance she had fallen into. But she could not move, could not speak, could only watch as her best friend transformed into something else. Emma opened her eyes. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye. Black like staring into a deep cave where no light had ever reached. She is here, Emma said in a voice that belonged to someone much older. Someone who had been dead for a very long time. That was when Emma started vomiting. But it was not normal vomit. It was black liquid that looked like motor oil mixed with blood. It poured out of Emma's mouth in a steady stream, splashing onto the white bathroom tiles and spreading like spilled paint. Sarah found her voice and screamed. The sound snapped her out of whatever paralysis had held her frozen. She lunged forward and grabbed Emma's arm, trying to pull her away from the mirror. Emma's skin was ice cold. Emma, stop it. Emma, wake up. But Emma kept vomiting the black liquid. It was coming faster now, more of it than should have been possible for a human stomach to hold. The smell was horrible, like rotting meat mixed with chemicals. Sarah ran out of the bathroom and down the hall to her parents' bedroom. She burst through the door without knocking. Mom! Dad! Something is wrong with Emma. Her parents were already awake. The screaming had roused them from sleep, and they were sitting up in bed looking confused and worried. What happened? Her mother asked. We were playing Bloody Mary and Emma started throwing up black stuff and her eyes turned black and... Slow down, honey, her father said. Take a deep breath and tell us what happened. But before Sarah could explain, the vomiting stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. Sarah and her parents stood in the hallway, listening to nothing. No sound from the bathroom. No sound from Emma. Sarah, his father walked to the bathroom and peered inside. She's not here, he said. They searched the entire house. Emma was nowhere to be found. The bathroom mirror was still cracked, and there were still stains on the floor where the black liquid had been, but Emma had vanished. Sarah? His mother called Emma his parents. They lived 6 blocks away on Oak Street. The phone rang and rang before Emma's father finally answered. Hello, Mike. This is Janet Chen. Is Emma home? What? No, she is at your house for the sleepover. Why? Sarah listened to her mother explain what had happened. How the girls had been playing a mirror game. How Emma had gotten sick. How she had disappeared from the bathroom. Mike Rodriguez was at their house in 5 minutes. He was a big man who worked construction and coached Little League baseball. The kind of father who could fix anything and was not afraid of anything. But when he saw the cracked mirror and the black stains on the bathroom floor, his face went pale. What kind of game were they playing? He asked. Bloody Mary, Sarah, his father replied. You know, the mirror thing kids do at sleepovers. Mike shook his head. Emma has been having nightmares about mirrors. She told me something was trying to talk to her through them. They called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes and took statements from everyone. They searched the house again, more thoroughly this time. They checked the yard and the garage and the basement. They knocked on neighbors' doors and asked if anyone had seen a 13-year-old Hispanic girl walking around alone. Nothing. Emma Rodriguez had simply vanished. The officers said they would file a missing person report and start a search. They took photos of the cracked mirror and collected samples of the black liquid. They promised to call as soon as they had any information, but Sarah knew the police would not find Emma. This was not a normal disappearance. This was something else. Something supernatural that belonged in creepypasta stories and American horror movies, not in suburban Illinois. Sarah did not sleep that night. She sat in her bedroom with all the lights on, staring at her own mirror and wondering if something was staring back. The next morning brought no news about Emma. The police search had turned up nothing. The black liquid samples had been sent to a lab for analysis, but results would take days. Emma's parents were going crazy with worry. They had called every relative, every friend, every person who might know where their daughter could be. They had posted her picture on social media and organized search parties with volunteers from the neighborhood. But Sarah knew they were looking in the wrong places. That afternoon, while the adults were out searching, Sarah went to Emma's house. She used the spare key that the Rodriguez family kept hidden under a fake rock by the front door. Emma had shown her the hiding spot months ago, back when they were normal kids who did normal things like ride bikes and complain about homework. The house felt empty and cold. Sarah called out Emma's name, but there was no answer. She walked through the living room and kitchen, looking for any sign of her friend. That was when she heard the singing. It was coming from upstairs. A child's voice singing a lullaby. But the melody was wrong. The notes were too high and too sharp, like fingernails dragging across glass. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly. Each step creaked under her weight, and each creak sounded like a gunshot in the silence. The singing was coming from Emma's bedroom. Sarah pushed open the door and looked inside. Emma was standing in the closet, facing the wall. Her back was to the room, and she was perfectly still except for her mouth, which moved as she sang the twisted lullaby. Emma, Sarah whispered. Emma stopped singing, but she did not turn around. Emma, are you okay? Still no response. Emma just stood there in the closet, facing the wall like she was being punished. Sarah took a step into the room. Emma, everyone is looking for you. Your parents are scared. We need to call them and tell them you're okay. That was when Emma spoke. I am not okay, she said in a voice that was not her own. The same deep, old voice from the night before. None of us are okay. What do you mean? Emma turned around. Her face was wrong. Still Emma's face, but changed. Her skin was pale gray, like she had been dead for days. Her eyes were still completely black, and her mouth was stained with dried blood and black liquid. She is inside me now, Emma said. The lady from the mirror. She has been waiting so long for someone to let her out. Sarah backed toward the bedroom door. We can fix this. We can help you. We just need to call someone who knows about this stuff. Emma smiled. The expression looked horrible on her gray face. There is no fixing this. There is no help. There is only spreading. What do you mean? She needs more bodies, more children to live inside. And she is going to use me to get them. Emma took a step forward, then another. Her movements were jerky and unnatural, like someone learning to operate a puppet. Sarah ran. She crashed down the stairs and out the front door, not bothering to lock it behind her. She ran down Oak Street and turned onto Maple, not stopping until she reached her own house. Her parents were in the kitchen, drinking coffee and talking quietly with Emma's parents. They all looked up when Sarah burst through the door. "She is at her house," Sarah gasped. "Emma is at her house, but something is wrong with her." The adults jumped up and started asking questions all at once. Sarah tried to explain what she had seen, but it sounded crazy even to her own ears. A girl standing in a closet facing the wall. Black eyes and gray skin. A voice that belonged to someone else. Mike Rodriguez was already heading for his car. "I don't care how crazy it sounds. If she is there, I'm going to get her." They all piled into 2 cars and drove to the Rodriguez house. Mike used his key to open the front door, and they all went inside. The house was empty. They searched every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. There was no sign that Emma had ever been there. No footprints in the dust. No disturbed furniture. Nothing. Sarah insisted that she had seen Emma in the bedroom closet. She led them upstairs and showed them exactly where her friend had been standing. But there was nothing there. "Maybe you imagined it, Sarah," his mother said gently. "You were under a lot of stress. Your mind might be playing tricks." But Sarah knew what she had seen. Emma had been there, had been infected or possessed by something that came through the mirror. Something that wanted to spread to other children. That night, Sarah locked her bedroom door and covered all the mirrors in her room with towels. She knew it was probably useless, but it made her feel safer. She was almost asleep when she heard the singing, the same twisted lullaby from Emma's bedroom. But this time it was coming from downstairs. Sarah got out of bed and crept to her bedroom door. She pressed her ear against the wood and listened. The singing was definitely coming from the first floor, from the direction of the living room. Sarah unlocked her door and opened it just a crack. The hallway was dark, but she could see a faint light coming from downstairs. Not electric light, something else, something that flickered like candles. She tiptoed to the top of the stairs and looked down. Emma was standing in the living room, facing the big mirror that hung over the fireplace. She was singing her horrible lullaby and swaying back and forth like she was dancing. But Emma was not alone. There were other children in the room, kids Sarah recognized from school in the neighborhood. They were all standing in front of mirrors, all singing the same song, all swaying in perfect unison. And they all had the same black eyes and gray skin as Emma. Sarah counted 12 children, 12 kids who had gone missing over the past few hours while everyone was focused on searching for Emma. 12 kids who had been taken and changed and turned into something else. The singing stopped. All 12 children turned to look at Sarah at exactly the same time. Their black eyes reflected the flickering light like pools of oil. "Come down, Sarah," Emma said in her new voice. "Come join us. The lady in the mirror wants to meet you." Sarah slammed her bedroom door and locked it. She grabbed her phone and called 911. 911. "What is your emergency?" "There are intruders in my house. Kids, but something is wrong with them. They broke in and they reacting really weird and slow down. Miss. Are your parents home?" Sarah realized she had not seen her parents since they got back from Emma's house. She had gone straight to her room and assumed they were downstairs watching TV or cleaning up. But what if they were not downstairs? What if something had happened to them too? Sarah heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Multiple sets of feet climbing toward the second floor. "Please send someone," Sarah whispered into the phone. They were coming upstairs. The footsteps stopped right outside her bedroom door. Sarah heard Emma's voice, but it was coming from right on the other side of the wood. "Sarah, open the door. We just want to talk." "Go away. The lady in the mirror has been watching you. She likes you. She wants you to be part of our family." Sarah looked around her room for a weapon, anything she could use to defend herself. She grabbed a baseball bat from her closet and held it with shaking hands. The doorknob started to turn. Sarah had locked the door, but the knob was turning anyway. Like someone on the other side had a key, or like the lock was opening itself. The door swung open. Emma stood in the doorway, her gray face illuminated by the hallway light. Behind her, Sarah could see the other children, all of them staring with their black eyes, all of them smiling with their blood-stained mouths. "Hello, Sarah," Emma said. We've been waiting for you." Sarah swung the baseball bat. It passed right through Emma like she was made of smoke. Sarah stumbled forward, off balance, and fell to her knees. The children surrounded her. Sarah felt cold hands touching her face, her arms, her hair. Fingers that felt like ice cubes pressed against her skin. "Dawn, to fight it," Emma whispered. "It only hurts for a moment." Sarah closed her eyes and waited for whatever was going to happen. But nothing did. When she opened her eyes again, she was alone in her bedroom. The door was closed and locked. The mirrors were still covered with towels. Everything was exactly as it had been before. Sarah checked her phone. The call to 911 had never happened. There was no record of it in her call history. She crept to her bedroom door and listened. The house was silent. No singing, no footsteps, no voices. Sarah opened her door and looked down the hallway. Empty. She went downstairs and found her parents asleep on the couch in front of the television. They looked normal, peaceful, like nothing strange had happened. Sarah shook her father's shoulder. Dad? Dad, wake up. He opened his eyes and looked at her with confusion. Sarah, what time is it? Did you see Emma? Was she here tonight? Emma? Honey, Emma is still missing. We spent all day looking for her, remember? Sarah felt like she was losing her mind. She had seen Emma, had seen the other children, had felt their cold hands touching her face. But now there was no evidence that any of it had happened. The next morning brought more bad news. 3 more children from the neighborhood had gone missing during the night. Kids who had been safe in their beds when their parents checked on them at 11 p.m., but were gone when their families woke up. The police were calling it an epidemic, some kind of coordinated kidnapping or human trafficking ring. They brought in FBI agents and child psychologists and search dogs. But Sarah knew the truth. The thing from the mirror was spreading, taking more children, building an army of possessed kids who could move freely through the suburban neighborhoods of America, recruiting more victims. And somehow, Sarah had been spared. But why? The answer came to her during math class. She was staring out the window, not paying attention to the lesson, when she saw her reflection in the glass. Her eyes were starting to turn gray. Not black like the other children, but gray, like the color was slowly draining out of them. Sarah ran to the bathroom and looked in the mirror above the sinks. Her reflection smiled at her with someone else's smile. Hello, Sarah, her reflection said in Emma's voice. We told you the lady in the mirror wanted to meet you. Sarah backed away from the mirror, but her reflection did not move. It just stood there, smiling and staring. You thought you escaped, the reflection continued. But there is no escape. We're inside you now. We've been inside you since that night. We just needed time to grow strong enough to take control. Sarah felt something moving in her chest. Something cold and hungry that was wrapping itself around her heart. Fight us all you want, her reflection said. But eventually, they'll give in. They always do. And when you do, will help us take the rest of your friends. The rest of your family. The rest of your town. Sarah ran out of the bathroom and straight to the principal's office. She told Mrs. Henderson everything. About the Bloody Mary game. About Emma's disappearance. About the possessed children and the thing in the mirror. Mrs. Henderson listened patiently, then called Sarah's parents. I think Sarah is having some kind of breakdown, she said into the phone. The stress of her friend's disappearance is affecting her more than we realized. Within an hour, Sarah was sitting in a therapist's office, trying to convince a stranger that supernatural forces were taking over her town. Dr. Martinez was a kind woman who specialized in childhood trauma. She explained that sometimes, when children experience frightening events, their minds create elaborate fantasies to help process the fear. What you describing sounds very real to you, Dr. Martinez said. But sometimes our brains can play tricks on us when we're scared or stressed. Sarah wanted to argue, but she could feel the cold thing in her chest getting stronger. Could feel her thoughts becoming less her own and more something else. She nodded and agreed to take the medication Dr. Martinez prescribed. Agreed to attend weekly therapy sessions. Agreed to try to separate fantasy from reality. But late that night, when she looked in her bedroom mirror, Sarah saw the truth reflected back at her. Her eyes were completely gray now. Her skin was starting to lose its color. And when she opened her mouth to scream, black liquid poured out instead of sound. The thing inside her was winning. Sarah covered all the mirrors in her house and refused to look at any reflective surfaces. But she could still hear Emma's voice whispering in her head, telling her to give up, telling her to let go, telling her that resistance was pointless. More children disappeared every night. The FBI set up a command center at the local high school. Parents formed armed patrol groups to watch their neighborhoods. The national news picked up the story and called it the Naperville Vanishings. But none of the adults understood what was really happening. Sarah was the only one who knew the truth. And soon, she would be too far gone to tell anyone. The final transformation happened on a Tuesday night in November. Sarah woke up at 3 a.m. and found herself standing in her closet, facing the wall, just like Emma had been. She had no memory of getting out of bed or walking to the closet. But she could hear herself singing the twisted lullaby. Sarah tried to stop, tried to turn around, tried to regain control of her own body. But she could not move, could not speak, could only stand there and sing while something else wore her like a costume. In the morning, her parents found her that way, standing in the closet, facing the wall, singing a song they had never heard before in a voice that did not sound like their daughter. They called Dr. Martinez, who recommended immediate hospitalization. Sarah was taken to a psychiatric facility where she could be observed and treated around the clock. But the doctors could not help her. They gave her medications that did nothing. They tried therapy techniques that had no effect. They ran tests that came back normal. Because what was wrong with Sarah was not medical. It was supernatural. Other children were brought to the same hospital. Kids from Naperville and the surrounding towns who had been found standing in closets or walking in circles or speaking in voices that belonged to dead people. The doctors called it a mass hysteria event, a psychological contagion that had spread through the community after the initial trauma of Emma's disappearance. But Sarah knew better. Late at night, when the nurses were not watching, the possessed children would gather in the hospital, this recreation room. They would stand in front of the mirrors and sing their horrible lullabies and plan their escape. Because the thing from the mirror was not done with them. It had bigger plans. Plans that went beyond one small town in Illinois. Plans that involved every child in America. Sarah tried to warn the doctors, tried to tell them that this was not a psychological condition but something else entirely. Something that was using children as vessels to spread across the country. But the doctors just increased her medication and scheduled more therapy sessions. On her 16th day in the hospital, Sarah stopped fighting. The cold thing in her chest had grown too strong. Her own thoughts were barely whispers now, drowned out by the voice of something ancient and hungry. That night, Sarah and the other possessed children walked out of the hospital. They did not sneak out or break out. They simply walked out through the front doors, past the security guards who did not seem to see them. They scattered across the Midwest, each child carrying the infection to a new town. A new school, a new group of potential victims. Sarah went home to Naperville. Her parents were asleep when she arrived. She stood at the foot of their bed and watched them for a long time, deciding whether they would be useful or just obstacles. In the end, she left them alone. Adults were harder to possess. Their minds were too set in their ways, too full of rational thoughts and logical explanations. Children were easier. Children believed in monsters and magic and things that lived in mirrors. Sarah went to her old elementary school and waited for morning. When the first kids arrived for classes, she was there to greet them. "Want to play a game?" she asked a group of second graders. It is called Bloody Mary. The children nodded eagerly. They followed Sarah to the bathroom, where she taught them the words and showed them how to stand in front of the mirror. By lunchtime, 5 more children had gray eyes and cold skin. By the end of the week, the entire school was infected. The thing from the mirror was spreading faster now. It had learned from its mistakes in Naperville, had developed better strategies for avoiding detection and eliminating resistance. Within a month, it had taken 3 towns in Illinois. Within 2 months, it had crossed state lines. The authorities tried to respond. But how do you fight an enemy that looks like innocent children? How do you contain a threat that spreads through playground games and sleepover activities? By the time anyone realized the true scope of the problem, it was too late. The American horror story had become an American reality, and somewhere in the mirrors of the world, something ancient smiled with satisfaction. Its long exile was finally over. The harvest had begun. Story 3. Clown statue that moves. Jenny Morrison was staring at the clown statue when she realized it had been watching her for the past 3 hours. The thing sat in the corner of the Hartwell family, this living room like it owned the place. 6 feet tall with a grotesque painted smile that stretched too wide across its ceramic face. Its glassy eyes seemed to track her movements as she cleaned up 8-year-old Tommy, his toys, and tried to ignore the creeping dread crawling up her spine. But here, it's the thing that made Jenny, his blood run cold in this quiet Pennsylvania suburb. The statue hadn't been in that corner when she arrived for her babysitting shift. It had been upstairs in the hallway. This was American horror at its most intimate. Not some distant monster or supernatural entity from a creepypasta story, but something wrong sitting in a normal family, this living room, pretending to be decoration while Jenny tried to figure out how a 6-foot ceramic statue had moved itself downstairs without making a sound. The Hartwells had left for their anniversary dinner at 7:30. Standard suburban parents, both lawyers who worked too much and worried about leaving Tommy with anyone but family. Jenny had been babysitting for them for 2 years, ever since she turned 16. She knew their house almost as well as her own. She knew they didn't own a clown statue. Not until tonight, when Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell had given her the usual instructions about bedtime and emergency numbers. They walked right past the thing like it wasn't there. Like it belonged, but Jenny had never seen it before in her life. What is with the clown? She asked Mrs. Hartwell, pointing at the statue positioned at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Hartwell had followed her gaze and smiled. Oh, that old thing? It's been in the family forever. Tommy loves it, but that was impossible. Jenny had walked up and down those stairs hundreds of times. She would have remembered something that's scary staring down at her from the landing. The statue was carved from what looked like white marble or ceramic, dressed in a traditional circus outfit with puffy sleeves and oversized buttons. Its face was painted in the classic sad clown style, with a single tear running down its left cheek. But the eyes were wrong. Too realistic, too aware. They followed you. After the Hartwells left, Jenny had tried to focus on her normal routine. Tommy wanted to watch cartoons and eat ice cream, standard 8-year-old demands that she was happy to fulfill. But every time she walked past the staircase, she could feel those painted eyes tracking her movement. At 9:00, she put Tommy to bed and settled into the living room to work on her history homework. The house was quiet except for the usual suburban sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the occasional car passing on Maple Street. This is when she noticed the statue wasn't upstairs anymore. It was standing in the corner of the living room, arms positioned at its sides like a soldier at attention. Same grotesque smile, same impossible eyes, same ceramic tear frozen forever on its painted cheek. But definitely not where she'd last seen it. Jenny's first thought was that she'd been mistaken about its original location. Maybe the thing had always been downstairs, and she'd just confused it with some other decoration upstairs. Moving to a new town for her senior year had left her feeling disoriented anyway. Maybe she was mixing up details from different houses she babysat at. But she knew that wasn't true. The statue had been upstairs when she arrived. She was sure of it. Jenny pulled out her phone to text her best friend Sarah about the weird situation. But the words looked crazy when she tried to type them. The creepy clown statue moved itself downstairs, sounded like the setup to some viral horror story you'd find on Reddit. Not something that happened in real life to real people in real suburban Pennsylvania homes. She deleted the message and tried to focus on her American history textbook. George Washington crossing the Delaware, the Boston Tea Party, normal historical events that didn't involve ceramic clowns moving around houses by themselves. But she couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift back to the statue, expecting to catch it in the act of moving. It never did. Just sat there grinning that horrible painted grin and staring at her with eyes that seemed far too human for something made of clay and paint. At 10:30, Jenny decided she needed a snack. The kitchen was just down the hall from the living room. A quick trip that shouldn't take more than a few minutes. She grabbed a granola bar from the pantry and a bottle of water from the refrigerator. When she returned to the living room, the statue was gone. Not moved to a different spot. Gone entirely. Jenny searched the downstairs rooms with growing panic. The dining room, the den, the half-bathroom by the front door. No 6-foot clown statue anywhere. It was like the thing had simply vanished into thin air. She checked upstairs, thinking maybe it had somehow returned to its original position. But the hallway was empty except for family photos and a small table with a lamp. No statue. Jenny was starting to wonder if she was losing her mind when she heard Tommy calling from his bedroom. Jenny, come quick. She ran upstairs, heart pounding with the kind of parental fear that all babysitters know. Tommy was sitting up in bed, pointing at his closet with wide, frightened eyes. "The clown man is in there," he whispered. "He keeps smiling at me." Jenny, his blood turned to ice water. She approached the closet slowly, every horror movie she ever watched playing through her mind. Dawn, to open the door. Dawn, to go in the dark room. Dawn, to investigate the scary noise. But Tommy was 8 years old and terrified, and she was responsible for keeping him safe. She yanked open the closet door. The statue stood among Tommy's hanging clothes like it had always belonged there. Same position, same smile, same impossible eyes that seemed to track her movement even though they were made of painted glass. "How did you get in here?" Jenny whispered to the thing. "It didn't answer." Of course it didn't answer. It was a statue. But Tommy heard her question and provided his own explanation that made Jenny's skin crawl with supernatural dread. "He walked," Tommy said simply. I saw him walk up the stairs and into my room. His feet made clicking sounds on the floor. Jenny stared at the ceramic figure. Its feet were indeed designed to look like old-fashioned clown shoes, complete with painted buckles and exaggerated curves. If it could move, those feet would definitely click against hardwood floors. Tommy, honey, statue's done. T.Y. You must have been dreaming. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake. I saw him come in and hide in my closet. He was looking for something. Looking for what? Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper that raised goosebumps along Jenny's arms. He was looking for you. Jenny closed the closet door and spent the next 20 minutes convincing Tommy that everything was fine, that the statue was just a decoration, that clowns couldn't really move by themselves. All the rational explanations that sounded reasonable when spoken out loud but felt hollow in the face of what they both witnessed. She tucked Tommy back into bed and returned downstairs, but sleep was clearly not going to happen for either of them. The house felt different now. Hostile, like something was watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Jenny tried calling the Hartwells to ask about the statue, but their phones went straight to voicemail. Probably enjoying their anniversary dinner at some fancy restaurant downtown, phones turned off for a romantic evening. She was on her own until they got home. At midnight, Jenny made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was going to confront the statue directly, march upstairs, open Tommy's closet, and demand an explanation from the ceramic figure that couldn't possibly be moving around the house by itself. Because that is what rational people did. They faced their fears instead of cowering in living rooms, jumping at every shadow. The upstairs hallway was dark except for the glow of Tommy's nightlight seeping under his bedroom door. Jenny could hear him breathing steadily, finally asleep despite his earlier terror. At least one of them would get some rest tonight. She opened his closet door slowly, expecting to see the statue standing among his clothes like a silent guardian. The closet was empty, not just empty of the statue, empty of everything. Tommy's clothes, his shoes, his backpack, his collection of baseball cards. All gone, leaving nothing but bare walls and wire hangers swaying slightly in the still air. Jenny's rational mind tried to process this impossibility. Closets didn't empty themselves. 7-year-olds didn't pack up their entire wardrobes and hide them somewhere else in the house. There had to be a logical explanation, but logic was becoming a luxury she couldn't afford. She checked Tommy's dresser drawers. Empty. His toy chest. Empty. Even his bed was stripped of sheets and blankets, leaving nothing but a bare mattress and box spring. Tommy himself was gone too. Jenny searched the entire house, calling his name and checking every room, every closet, every hiding spot an 8-year-old might choose. The basement, the attic, the pantry, the space under the staircase. Nothing. Tommy Hartwell had vanished as completely as his belongings, leaving no trace except the faint impression of his body on the bare mattress. Jenny called the police at 12:47 a.m., her voice shaking as she tried to explain the situation to the emergency dispatcher. I'm babysitting at 1247 Maple Street, and the child is missing. Tommy Hartwell, 8 years old. I put him to bed at 9, and now he is gone. His room is completely empty. Everything is gone. Please stay calm. Are you sure the child isn't hiding somewhere in the house? They looked everywhere. He's not here, and all his stuff is missing too. His clothes, his toys, everything. We resending units to your location. Do not leave the house. Do not touch anything that might be evidence. Jenny hung up and sat in the empty living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Tommy was gone. His belongings were gone. The statue had been moving around the house all evening like it was alive, and she was alone with whatever had taken them. The police arrived within 10 minutes, which was impressive response time for the small Pennsylvania town. 2 officers, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else than investigating reports of missing children and moving statues on a Friday night. Officer Martinez was the senior partner, a middle-aged woman with the kind of calm professionalism that comes from dealing with domestic disputes and minor crimes in suburban neighborhoods. Officer Peterson was younger, probably fresh out of the academy, with the eager nervousness of someone still trying to prove himself. Miss Morrison, can you walk us through what happened tonight? Jenny told them everything. The statue appearing upstairs, then moving to the living room, then disappearing into Tommy's closet. Tommy claimed that he'd seen it walking. The empty closet and missing child. She watched their expressions change from professional concern to barely concealed skepticism as her story progressed. Moving statues and vanishing children sounded like the kind of thing teenage babysitters invented to cover up more mundane failures of supervision. "Miss Morrison," Officer Martinez said gently, "is it possible that Tommy is hiding somewhere you haven't looked?" Children his age sometimes play elaborate games, especially when they trying to avoid bedtime. "I've searched the entire house. He's not here." "What about the statue you mentioned? Can you show us where you last saw it?" Jenny led them upstairs to Tommy's empty bedroom. The closet door stood open, revealing nothing but bare walls and the faint scent of cedar and childhood. Officer Peterson used his flashlight to examine the closet interior. No sign of disturbance, no indication that anyone was hiding in here recently. "The statue was right there," Jenny insisted, pointing to the spot where the ceramic clown had stood among Tommy's clothes. 6 feet tall, dressed like a circus performer. It had this horrible painted smile and eyes that followed you around the room. The officers exchanged glances that said everything about what they thought of her story. "Miss Morrison, we're going to need to contact the parents and get a description of the missing child. Do you have their cell phone numbers?" Jenny provided the Hartwells' contact information, and Officer Martinez stepped into the hallway to make the call. Jenny could hear her explaining the situation in the calm, professional tones police used to deliver terrible news to unsuspecting families. "Mr. Hartwell, this is Officer Martinez with the Pennsylvania State Police. I am calling about an incident at your home involving your son Tommy." A long pause. "Sir, I am at your house right now with your babysitter, Jenny Morrison. She reports that your son is missing and that his bedroom has been emptied of all belongings." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Hartwell, are you saying you don't have a son named Tommy?" Jenny, his blood turned to ice. She could hear Mr. Hartwell's voice through the phone, confused and increasingly agitated. "Officer, my wife and I don't have any children. We've never had a babysitter. Do you know who this Jenny Morrison is? But she is not supposed to be in our house." Officer Peterson was already reaching for his handcuffs when Jenny realized the truth. There had never been a Tommy Hartwell. There had never been a babysitting job. She had no memory of how she'd gotten into this house or why she believed she was supposed to be here. Her last clear recollection was walking home from school on Friday afternoon, taking her usual route through the suburban streets of her Pennsylvania town. Now it was Saturday morning, and she was standing in a stranger's house, claiming to be babysitting a child who didn't exist. "Miss Morrison, we need you to come with us," Officer Martinez said, her voice gentle but firm. We're going to figure out what is going on here." But as they led Jenny toward the stairs, she saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. The clown statue was back, standing at the bottom of the staircase, arms at its sides, painted smile stretched wide across its ceramic face. Watching them descend with those impossible glass eyes that seemed far too human for something made of clay and paint. "Do you see it?" Jenny whispered to the officers. "The statue. It's right there." Officer Peterson followed her gaze and shook his head. "Miss Morrison, it's nothing there." But Jenny could see it clearly. 6 feet tall, dressed in circus clothes, with a single painted tear running down its left cheek. Real as the officers flanking her, solid as the wooden stairs beneath her feet. The statue, its head turned slightly as they passed, tracking their movement with mechanical precision. Its smile seemed wider now, more satisfied. The psychological evaluation at Pennsylvania State Hospital lasted 3 days. Jenny underwent every test the doctors could think of. Blood work to check for drugs or toxins, brain scans to look for tumors or abnormalities, psychological assessments to determine her mental state. Everything came back normal. Physically, Jenny Morrison was a perfectly healthy 17-year-old girl with no history of mental illness or substance abuse. She had good grades, stable friendships, a part-time job at the local movie theater. No red flags that would explain why she'd broken into a stranger's house and invented an elaborate story about babysitting a non-existent child. But she insisted the story was true, even when shown evidence that the Hartwells had no children, even when her own parents confirmed she never babysat for that family, even when police found no trace of anyone named Tommy Hartwell in their computer systems. Jenny maintained that she remembered every detail of that night. The anniversary dinner, the missing statue, the empty closet, the vanishing child. All of it real, all of it true, despite the complete lack of supporting evidence. Dr. Patricia Vance was the psychiatrist assigned to Jenny's case. She'd seen hundreds of patients experiencing various forms of dissociation and false memory, but Jenny's situation was unusual in its specificity and consistency. Jenny, I want you to think carefully about Friday evening. Before you remember being in the Hartwell's house, what's the last thing you clearly recall? Walking home from school, I took Maple Street like always, past the big colonial houses. It was getting dark, but not completely dark yet. And then I was in their living room, and Mrs. Hartwell was telling me about Tommy's bedtime routine. But you understand that doesn't make sense, right? There's no gap between walking home and being in their house. How did you get inside? Why did you think you were supposed to be there? Jenny stared at her hands, trying to piece together memories that felt real but couldn't possibly be true. The harder she concentrated, the more the details seemed to slip away like water through her fingers. I don't know, she admitted, but the statue was real. I know it was real. Dr. Vance had heard about the clown statue from the police report. Jenny's most persistent delusion, a 6-foot ceramic figure that she claimed had moved around the house throughout the evening. The officers had found no such statue anywhere in the Hartwell home. Tell me about the statue again. Describe it in as much detail as you can. It was wearing a circus outfit, puffy sleeves, big buttons, pointed shoes. Its face was painted white with red lips and a red nose. But the eyes were wrong, too realistic, and it had this tear painted on its cheek, like it was crying. You said it moved around the house. How? I never saw it actually moving. It would be in one place, and then later it would be somewhere else. Like it was following me. Dr. Vance made notes about possible explanations. Dissociative episodes sometimes involved detailed false memories that felt completely real to the patient. Stress, trauma, or even sleep deprivation could trigger elaborate hallucinations. But Jenny showed no signs of the typical causes, no recent trauma or major life changes, no history of sleep disorders or chronic stress, no family history of mental illness or neurological conditions. She was, by all accounts, a normal teenage girl who experienced something that defied rational explanation. Jenny, I'm going to show you some pictures. I want you to tell me if any of them look familiar. Dr. Vance pulled out a folder containing photographs of various antique dolls and statues, collectibles that might match Jenny's description of the clown figure she claimed to have seen. Jenny flipped through the images slowly, shaking her head at each one. No, none of these are right. The statue I saw was bigger, more realistic, and scarier. She reached the last photograph and stopped. It was a black and white image from what looked like a police evidence file. The photo showed a large ceramic clown figure standing in what appeared to be a basement or storage room. Even in the grainy photograph, the statue, his painted smile looked grotesque and wrong. That's it, Jenny whispered. That's exactly what I saw. Dr. Vance checked the file notation on the back of the photograph. The image was from a police investigation in 1987, 35 years ago. A case involving missing children in a small Pennsylvania town not far from Jenny's current location. 7 children had disappeared over the course of 6 months, all between the ages of 6 and 10. All last seen playing in neighborhoods with large colonial houses and tree-lined streets. The police had eventually tracked the disappearances to a man named Edward Grimsby, who collected antique circus memorabilia in his basement. When they searched his property, they found evidence of the missing children. And they found the clown statue. According to the case file, Grimsby claimed the statue was haunted. That it moved around his house by itself, luring children into his basement where he would kill them and hide their bodies. He insisted he wasn't responsible for their deaths, that the statue was controlling his actions. The court had dismissed his claims as an attempt to avoid responsibility for his crimes. Edward Grimsby was executed in 1989. The statue had been destroyed after the trial, burned in an industrial furnace along with other evidence from the case. Dr. Vance stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she knew to be true. Jenny Morrison couldn't possibly have seen this statue. It had been destroyed before she was born. She couldn't have known about the Grimsby case unless she researched it extensively, and there was no evidence of such research in her internet history or library records. Yet she described the statue in perfect detail, down to the single painted tear on its left cheek. Jenny, where do you think you might have seen this statue before? In a book? Maybe? Or online? Jenny shook her head. I never saw it before that night. But I know it was real. I know it was in that house. Dr. Vance closed the file and made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. Jenny Morrison was experiencing false memories related to a historical case she couldn't possibly know about. The logical explanation was that she somehow encountered information about the Grimsby murders and incorporated it into a dissociative episode. But the specific details were too accurate, too precise, too impossible. Jenny was released from the hospital on Tuesday with a diagnosis of stress-induced dissociation and a prescription for anti-anxiety medication. Her parents picked her up, relieved to have their daughter back but confused about what had really happened. The doctors think she had some kind of breakdown, her mother explained to concerned relatives. Teenage stress, the pressure of senior year and college applications. She'll be fine. But Jenny knew she wouldn't be fine, because every night when she closed her eyes, she could see the statue standing in the corner of her bedroom, smiling that horrible painted smile and watching her with eyes that seemed far too human for something made of ceramic and paint. She started sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help. The statue was there in the bright fluorescent glow, as real as her dresser or her desk or her collection of books. Sometimes it stood by the window, sometimes by the door, sometimes right next to her bed. Always watching, always smiling, always waiting for something. Jenny tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, residual effects from whatever psychological episode she experienced at the Hartwell's house. The mind playing tricks, creating false images based on false memories. But she knew the difference between imagination and reality. The statue was real, and it was getting closer. By Friday night, exactly 1 week after the incident at the Hartwell's house, the statue was standing right next to Jenny's bed when she woke up at 3 a.m. So close she could see the fine cracks in its painted face, the dust collected in the folds of its ceramic costume. So close she could smell the faint odor of something old and wrong and hungry. Jenny sat up slowly, afraid to make any sudden movements. The statue, its head turned to follow her, mechanical and precise, like a security camera tracking motion. Its painted smile stretched wider, and for the first time, it spoke. "Found you," it said in a voice like grinding stone. Jenny screamed and ran from her bedroom, but the hallway was wrong. Instead of leading to her parents' room and the staircase to the first floor, it stretched endlessly in both directions. Door after door after door, all identical, all leading to rooms she'd never seen before. She tried the first door, another bedroom, this one belonging to a little boy with toys scattered across the floor and dinosaur posters on the walls. But the bed was empty, sheets pulled back like someone had left in a hurry. The second door opened onto a different child's room. A little girl's space with pink walls and stuffed animals arranged on shelves. Also empty, also abandoned. Every door she tried revealed another empty bedroom belonging to another missing child. 7 rooms in total, 7 children who disappeared in 1987. And at the end of the impossible hallway, a door marked with her own name in childish crayon letters. Jenny Morrison. She opened the door and found herself back in Tommy Hartwell's bedroom, exactly as it had been that first night. Toys scattered across the floor, clothes hanging in the closet, superhero posters on the walls. Everything exactly as she remembered it, except Tommy was there now, sitting on his bed in dinosaur pajamas, looking at her with eyes that were far too old for his 8-year-old face. "You were here," he said, and his voice was the same grinding stone sound the statue had used. "I've been waiting." Jenny backed toward the door, but it had vanished. The wall was solid plaster painted in cheerful blue, decorated with more superhero posters and a growth chart marking Tommy, his height over the years. "You were not real," she whispered. "None of this is real." Tommy smiled, and his teeth were painted ceramic. "Does it matter? You're here now. We can play together forever." The other children appeared in the doorway that had ceased to exist. 7 kids between the ages of 6 and 10, all wearing the clothes they disappeared in 35 years ago. All smiling painted smiles and watching her with ceramic eyes. "We've been so lonely," said a little girl with pigtails. "But now you were here to play with us." "The statue man brought you," said a boy in a striped shirt. "He is very good at finding new friends." Jenny turned toward the window, thinking maybe she could escape that way, but instead of glass she found herself staring into the painted face of the clown statue. It filled the entire window frame, smiling that impossible smile and watching her with eyes that held intelligence and hunger and something that might have been love if love could be twisted into something horrible. "Found you," it said again. And Jenny understood. She wasn't in her bedroom anymore. Wasn't in the Hartwell's house. Wasn't anywhere in the real world at all. She was inside the statue. Inside the hollow ceramic body that had been calling to lonely children for decades, luring them into its painted embrace where they could play forever and never grow up and never be alone again. The police found Jenny Morrison's body on Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after the incident at the Hartwell's house. She was discovered in the basement of an abandoned house on Elm Street, 3 blocks from her family home. Her body was positioned inside a large ceramic clown statue that had somehow appeared in the basement overnight. The statue hadn't been there when police had last checked the property during their investigation into recent break-ins. Jenny was curled up inside the hollow figure like she was sleeping, wearing the same clothes she had on when she gone to bed Friday night. There were no signs of violence or struggle. The coroner determined she died peacefully, though the cause of death remained unexplained. Heart failure, maybe, or shock, or something else entirely. The statue was destroyed immediately after Jenny's body was removed, burned in the same industrial furnace that had supposedly destroyed it 35 years earlier. But sometimes, late at night when the suburban streets of Pennsylvania are quiet and dark, children report seeing a tall figure in circus clothes standing under streetlights or behind trees in their backyards. Always smiling, always watching, always looking for new friends to play with forever. The statue is very patient, and there are so many lonely children in the world. Story 4. Hiker who wasn't there. The smell hit Marcus first. Sweet rot mixed with mountain pine. Death wrapped in nature. This perfume. He stumbled backward on the narrow trail, his hiking boots scraping against loose rocks. The Appalachian wilderness stretched endlessly around him, but all he could focus on was the thing hanging 15 feet up in the old oak tree. What used to be a person, mummified, dried out like jerky left in the sun. This was supposed to be a simple 3-day hike through North Carolina, its most beautiful trails. Now Marcus stared at a corpse that shouldn't exist, wondering how the hell he'd gotten here. The story started 2 days ago. Marcus had been making good time on the trail when he met another hiker. Tall guy, maybe 40, with gear that looked expensive but well used. The kind of person who knew what they were doing out here. Beautiful country, the stranger had said, approaching Marcus near a creek crossing. Name is David. Marcus remembered shaking hands. David's grip was firm, his smile genuine. Nothing strange about him except Marcus couldn't remember David ever blinking. Not once during their 3-hour conversation. Not when dust kicked up from the trail. Not when gnats swarmed around their faces. David's eyes stayed wide open, unmoving, like glass marbles pressed into flesh. But people don't notice everything, Marcus had told himself. He was tired, probably imagining things. David seemed nice enough, knowledgeable about local wildlife, trail conditions, weather patterns. They decided to camp together that first night. That is when the real supernatural horror began. Marcus woke around 3 in the morning to find David standing over his sleeping bag. Not sitting by the dying campfire. Not checking his gear, standing directly above Marcus, motionless as a statue. You shouldn't have stopped here, David whispered. The words sent ice through Marcus's veins. He pretended to stay asleep, controlling his breathing while his heart hammered against his ribs. Through barely opened eyes, he watched David remain perfectly still for another hour before finally moving back to his own tent. Marcus didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, David acted completely normal. Cheerful conversation over instant coffee. Helpful tips about the day, this terrain. No mention of his midnight vigil or cryptic warning. Marcus considered hiking alone from that point, but something held him back. Curiosity mixed with dread. The same feeling that makes people slow down to look at car accidents. He needed to understand what was happening. They hiked together through dense forest, past waterfalls that should have been breathtaking but felt ominous. David maintained steady conversation, but Marcus noticed other things now. The way David's footsteps made no sound on the trail. How animals went silent when he approached. The fact that David never seemed to sweat, despite the humid North Carolina heat. Most disturbing was David's knowledge of the area. Too detailed, too specific. See that clearing ahead? David pointed. 3 years ago, a family from Georgia got lost there. Rescuers found them a week later, dehydrated. Talking about a man who wouldn't stop following them. How do you know that? Marcus asked. David's smile never wavered. I've been hiking these mountains for a long time. Those glass marble eyes stared ahead without blinking. By the second night, Marcus was sure he was dealing with something beyond normal human experience. This wasn't just another creepypasta story he'd read online. This was real American horror, the kind that grew in isolated places where cell phones didn't do work and help was days away. They made camp near a stream. Marcus pretended to sleep early, but stayed alert. Sure enough, around midnight, he heard movement outside his tent. Through the thin fabric, he saw David, his silhouette, standing, watching, whispering words too quiet to understand. This time, Marcus acted. He unzipped his tent quietly and slipped out the back. The forest was thick enough to provide cover if he stayed low and moved carefully. His plan was simple: circle around, get back to the main trail, and hike out in the dark. But the forest had other plans. No matter which direction Marcus turned, he found himself back at their campsite. The same stream, the same clearing, the same motionless figure standing guard over his abandoned tent. He tried for hours, following the stream downstream, using his compass to head due east, even marking trees to avoid going in circles. Nothing worked. The scary truth hit him like a physical blow. He was trapped. Dawn brought a new horror. David was sitting by the campfire when Marcus finally returned, exhausted and defeated. "Bad dream?" David asked. Still no blinking. "You were thrashing around in your tent pretty badly." Marcus hadn't been in his tent for 6 hours. "I know what you are," Marcus said. "Too tired for games?" David tilted his head like a curious dog. "What am I? I don't know exactly. But you're not human." "That is an interesting theory." David poured coffee from a pot that Marcus didn't remember him filling. "What makes you think that? You never blink. Your feet done to make sound. Animals run from you. And we re-trapped here, Aaron. Did we? This whole area is like a supernatural cage." David considered this while sipping his coffee. The liquid disappeared into his mouth, but Marcus never saw him swallow. "You right about being trapped," David said finally, "but wrong about the reason." He gestured toward the trees surrounding their campsite. "Look closer." Marcus looked. At first, he saw a normal forest. Oak trees, pine trees, thick underbrush. Then his eyes adjusted, and the ghost of understanding crept up his spine. Bones, scattered throughout the forest floor like fallen leaves. Skulls grinning from behind tree trunks. Rib cages tangled in thorn bushes. "How many?" Marcus whispered. "I stopped counting after 50. David's voice carried no emotion. "Hikers, mostly. Some hunters. A few families who got lost." "You killed them?" "No." David shook his head. "I never kill anyone. I just collect them." "Collect them? This place is special. Old. The Cherokee knew about it long before white settlers arrived. They called it the Hungry Ground. A place where the earth itself feeds." David gestured to the bones again. "I am just the shepherd. I guide people here, and the land does the rest." Marcus felt reality shifting around him like quicksand. The land, it is alive, in its way. Conscious. It needs sustenance to maintain itself, to keep the barriers between worlds intact. Without regular feeding, things much worse than me would break through. The supernatural explanation should have sounded insane. But sitting in that bone-filled clearing, with a creature that looked human but wasn't, Marcus found it perfectly believable. "So what? Some kind of forest guardian?" "What's left of the first person who found this place." David's smile never changed, but something sad flickered in those unblinking eyes. "That was in 1847. I was heading west to California. Gold fever. You've been here for over 150 years. Time works differently here. Sometimes I remember being human. Most days, I just follow my purpose." Marcus tried to process this information while his survival instincts screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. Every escape attempt had proven that. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you become part of the forest." "Don't worry. It's not painful. The land is almost count about it. I'll just get tired, then sleepy. Your body will find a nice spot to rest, and the earth will claim you. And then I'll feed the hungry ground for a few decades. Maybe centuries. Eventually, your essence will become part of something larger. Something that keeps the real monsters locked away in places they belong." David stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "I know it's not the ending you wanted for your hiking trip. But look at it this way. You'll be serving a greater purpose. Protecting innocent people from things much worse than death." Marcus felt drowsiness creeping through his limbs. Not natural sleepiness. Something deeper. His eyelids grew heavy despite the adrenaline that should have kept him alert. "Fight it if you want," David said. "Some people do, but it always wins in the end." Marcus tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't to respond properly. The forest around him seemed to pulse with invisible life. Tree roots shifted beneath the soil. Leaves whispered secrets in languages older than human speech. He was becoming part of something ancient and hungry. "One last question," Marcus managed to say through increasingly thick speech. "Of course. Do you remember your real name?" For the first time in 2 days, David's expression changed. Confusion flickered across his features, followed by something that might have been pain. He paused. "I think it started with J, maybe James? Or John? You don't. Do you remember? The land takes that too, eventually. Names, memories, everything that made you individual. It's not cruel, just thorough." Marcus's vision blurred. The last thing he saw clearly was David's face, still wearing that unchanging smile but with tears rolling down his cheeks. Tears that never touched the ground. When Marcus woke up, he was hanging in a tree, not sitting against the trunk or caught in branches. Hanging 15 feet up, suspended by nothing visible, his body dried and mummified like ancient leather. But he was still conscious, still aware, still himself. Somehow, the forest stretched endlessly below him. From his elevated position, he could see the true scope of the hungry ground. Hundreds of trees held similar figures, a vast collection of preserved hikers, hunters, and lost souls feeding the supernatural ecosystem. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time felt meaningless. Marcus watched David guide new victims into the clearing, a young couple from Tennessee, an elderly man hiking alone, 3 college students on spring break. Each time, the same routine. Friendly conversation, shared camps, midnight vigils, and inevitable collection. Some fought harder than others. The college students tried to escape for 2 days before the land's influence overwhelmed them. The elderly man simply accepted his fate with quiet dignity. The young couple held hands as drowsiness claimed them. All of them ended up in trees. But Marcus noticed something David hadn't mentioned. The preserved victims weren't completely passive. They could influence things, in small ways. Make branches creak warnings, shift shadows to create unease, generate the feeling of being watched. They were trying to warn people away. Marcus focused his limited power on creating that sweet rot smell he noticed on his first day. If he could make it strong enough, maybe future hikers would turn back before David could work his supernatural charm. It was a small rebellion, but it felt important. Months passed in his aerial prison. Marcus learned to recognize the signs of David's hunting cycle. The creature would disappear for weeks at a time, presumably guiding victims through the mountains. Then he returned with fresh additions to his collection. Sometimes David would sit beneath Marcus's tree and talk. "I remember more of my name now," he said one evening. Jonathan Mills. "I had a wife back in Ohio. Sarah. We were going to start a farm in California." Marcus tried to respond, but mummified vocal cords done to work. "The worst part I sent to forgetting who I was," David continued. "It's remembering just enough to know what I lost." These conversations became regular, David sharing fragments of his stolen humanity while Marcus hung silent overhead, a witness to the monster's remaining conscience. "Do you think they hate me?" David asked one night. "All the people I collected?" Marcus wished he could answer. The truth was complicated. There was anger, yes, but also understanding. David was as much a victim as any of them. The real monster was the hungry ground itself, the ancient force that demanded regular sacrifice to maintain cosmic balance. The horror wasn't that David was evil. The horror was that he'd once been good. Spring arrived, bringing new hikers to the mountains. Marcus watched them approach his tree with growing dread. A family with 2 young children. The kids were maybe 8 and 10 years old. David appeared on schedule, all smiles and helpful advice. But something was different this time. His movements seemed more erratic. His smile flickered occasionally, revealing the anguish underneath. "Beautiful area," the father said, adjusting his backpack. "Our first time hiking the Appalachian Trail. It's perfect for families," David replied. "Very safe. Nothing dangerous out here." The mother pointed up at Marcus' tree. "What is that hanging up there?" David followed her gaze, and for just a moment, his facade cracked completely. Marcus saw raw horror in those unblinking eyes, a man forced to confront the magnitude of his crimes. "Old hunting blind," David said quickly. "Abandoned years ago. But the damage was done. The mother's protective instincts were activated. She gathered her children closer and started looking for reasons to leave. Actually, she said to her husband, maybe we should head back. The weather looks like it might turn. The sky was perfectly clear. David tried to salvage the situation, but desperation made him clumsy. His usual smooth charm became obviously artificial. The family excused themselves and hurried back down the trail. For the first time since Marcus had known him, David had failed to collect his prey. That night, David sat beneath Marcus's tree and wept. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. I remember Sarah's face now. I remember the farm we planned. I remember being human. Marcus felt something shift in the supernatural atmosphere. The hungry ground was growing impatient with its servant's weakness. It is getting angry, David said, as if reading Marcus's thoughts. The land, it wants feeding, and I let them escape. Trees began to creak ominously. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Shadows moved independently of their sources. What happens if I refuse? David asked the darkness. If I stop bringing people here? The forest answered with a sound like screaming wind. Every preserved victim in every tree began to sway violently, their mummified bodies dancing a macabre puppet show. David got his answer. It will find someone else. He realized, another shepherd, another collector, and they might not have any remaining humanity to slow them down. The swaying stopped. The temperature returned to normal. The hungry ground had made its point. David looked up at Marcus with eyes that finally blinked. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so goddamn sorry. Then he walked into the forest and didn't return. Marcus waited. Days passed without any sign of David or new victims. The supernatural energy of the place felt different. Restless, searching. Then Marcus heard voices on the trail, new hikers approaching, but when they entered the clearing, there was no friendly guide to greet them. Instead, they found Marcus, this mummified body hanging in the tree. Jesus Christ, one of them said. Is that a person? We need to call the police, another replied. This is a crime scene. But their cell phones had no signal. And when they tried to leave the clearing to find help, they discovered what Marcus had learned days earlier. There was no way out. The hungry ground had found new shepherds, plural this time, more efficient than relying on a single tortured soul. Marcus watched from his tree as the hikers grew increasingly panicked. Watched them exhaust themselves trying to escape. Watched supernatural drowsiness gradually claim them. But something was different now. The new victims didn't hang in trees immediately. Instead, they stood in the clearing like David once had, unblinking, smiling, ready to guide the next group of lost souls to their doom. The hungry ground had evolved, learned from David's weakness. Now it could create multiple collectors, each with just enough humanity to seem trustworthy but not enough to develop troublesome consciences. It was a perfect system. American horror at its most efficient. Marcus tried to warn future victims through scent and shadow, but his power was limited. Most hikers ignored subtle signs in favor of trusting the friendly people they met on the trail. The collection grew rapidly. One day, Marcus noticed something that filled him with fresh dread. Among the trees holding mummified victims, he spotted a small figure that made his preserved heart break. A child, maybe 10 years old, hanging like a grotesque Christmas ornament in an ancient oak. The new collectors weren't limiting themselves to adults. That night, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his first day in the tree. Hope, because hanging 20 feet away, in a massive pine tree, was David. The original collector had returned, transformed into just another preserved victim. But unlike the others, David retained his awareness, his humanity, his guilt, and Marcus realized they might not be as powerless as they believed. It took months of careful experimentation, but Marcus and David learned to coordinate their limited abilities. Together, they could create stronger warnings, more obvious signs of danger. They developed a system of creaking branches and shifting shadows that could spell out simple messages. Turn back, danger here, Don. To trust them. It wasn't much, but it saved some people. Smart hikers who paid attention to their environment occasionally heeded the warnings and found ways to leave before the new collectors could trap them. But the hungry ground adapted again. The new collectors began telling stories about previous accidents in the area. How preserved bodies in trees were just unfortunate hikers who had gotten lost and died of exposure. Nothing supernatural. Nothing dangerous for prepared outdoorsmen. They turned Marcus and the other victims into props in their con game. See that mummy up there? One collector would say. Poor guy got turned around in a storm last winter. That is why you need experienced guides like us out here. It was brilliant, evil, but brilliant. The collection continued growing. The hungry ground fed regularly. And Marcus hung in his tree, a prisoner and unwilling accomplice to ongoing supernatural horror. Years passed. Marcus lost count of the victims, lost track of David's attempts to warn people, lost hope that their situation would ever change. Then, on a gray October morning, something different happened. A lone hiker entered the clearing, young woman, maybe 25, with confident movements and alert eyes. She looked directly at Marcus, his tree, and smiled. "Hello, Jonathan," she said to the mummified figure of David. "My name is Sarah." David's preserved body went completely still. "Sarah Mills, actually, I kept your name after you disappeared. Been looking for you for a very long time." Marcus felt the supernatural atmosphere shift. The hungry ground itself seemed surprised. "I know you. Still in there?" Sarah continued, speaking to David's tree. "Still aware, still suffering. And I know this place has been feeding on that suffering for over a century." She pulled something from her backpack, a small leather journal, aged and worn. "Your diary," she explained. "The one you left in our cabin before heading west. It took me 50 years to find it, and another 100 to understand what it meant." She opened the journal and read aloud, "If anything happens to me on this journey, Sarah must know that I loved her more than gold, more than adventure, more than life itself." David's mummified form began to glow with soft, warm light. "The hungry ground feeds on suffering," Sarah said. "But love is stronger than hunger. Always has been." The light spread from David to Marcus, then to every preserved victim in every tree. The entire forest blazed with supernatural radiance. "I've come to take you home, Jonathan. All of you." The hungry ground fought back. Trees shook violently. The earth cracked open. Screaming winds tried to tear Sarah apart. But she stood firm, reading from the diary, speaking words of love and forgiveness and hope. Each word weakened the ancient evil that had claimed so many lives. The new collectors tried to intervene, but the light burned them away like morning fog. They had been empty vessels all along, with no real power beyond what the hungry ground provided. When the light finally faded, Marcus found himself standing on solid ground for the first time in years. His body was whole again, fully human, though translucent like morning mist. Around him, dozens of other victims stood in similar ghostly forms. All the people who had died in this place over the centuries. All the souls the hungry ground had consumed. David stood apart from the group, solid and real, no longer mummified. He stared at Sarah with wonder and disbelief. "You're not 25, he said. Sarah smiled. "I'm not 25 anymore. No, I'm much older. I've been learning things, Jonathan, about life and death and the spaces between, about how love can transcend time and space and even supernatural imprisonment." "But how?" Questions later, Sarah interrupted. "Right now, we need to finish this." She walked to the center of the clearing and knelt, placing her hands flat against the earth. "This place doesn't have to be hungry anymore," she said. "It can rest. All the souls it consumed can move on. The cycle can end." The ground beneath her hands began to glow, not with the harsh light of supernatural power, but with something warmer, something peaceful. Marcus felt it calling to him, a gentle invitation to let go, to stop fighting, to finally rest. One by one, the ghostly victims began to fade, not destroyed, but released, moving on to whatever came next. Marcus was among the last to go. Before the peace claimed him, he looked back at David and Sarah. They were solid now, completely human, holding hands in the center of what had once been a supernatural killing ground. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. Then he was gone. The hungry ground died with its last victim, this release. The forest became just a forest again. Trees were just trees. The earth was just earth. David and Sarah walked out together, back to the world of the living. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows through the Appalachian Mountains, hikers report hearing whispers in the trees. Not warnings or threats, but something else. Words of love, spoken by voices that sound like they smiling. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough to keep the real monsters away. At least for now. The trail goes on. It always does. And somewhere in the darkness between the trees, something new might be stirring. Something hungry. After all, this is America. They got plenty of dark places. Plenty of old hungers, The mountains remember everything, even the things we try to forget. Story 5. Rave at Century Manor Psychiatric Hospital. The bass hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah's breath fogged in the October air as she crouched behind the rusted fence surrounding Century Manor Psychiatric Hospital. The abandoned building loomed against the Ontario sky, its broken windows flickering with strobing lights from inside. This wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't supposed to be happening. She'd come to document urban decay for her photography blog. Instead, she stumbled onto something that made her skin crawl. The supernatural energy radiating from the crumbling brick walls felt wrong. Dead wrong. Through her camera lens, she watched bodies moving in the main hall. Hundreds of them, dancing, writhing. The electronic music pounded so hard it made her teeth ache. But something was off about the way they moved. Too fluid, too desperate, like they couldn't stop. Sarah adjusted her telephoto lens and zoomed in. Her stomach dropped. They were hurting themselves. A girl in torn fishnets clawed at her own arms, drawing blood that looked black under the pulsing lights. A man in a tank top bit deep into his shoulder, tearing flesh. Others scratched at their faces, their necks, their chests. All while dancing, all while smiling. What the hell? Sarah whispered. The drone footage would later show everything. Sarah didn't know about the drone yet. Didn't know someone else was watching. Didn't know this was all being recorded for something far worse than a viral video. She clicked through shot after shot, her professional instincts overriding her horror. This was American horror at its finest. Real creepypasta material. The kind of stuff that would make her famous if she could get out alive. The DJ booth sat elevated at the far end of the hall. Even from her distance, Sarah could see the figure behind the turntables wasn't moving normally either. His head lolled at an unnatural angle. His arms moved like they were being controlled by invisible strings. Century Manor had been closed for 30 years. The psychiatric hospital had a reputation even before it shut down. Patients disappeared. Staff quit without notice. There were stories about experimental treatments. Music therapy taken too far. Frequencies that could rewire a human brain. Sarah knew the stories. Every urban explorer in the Great Lakes region knew them. But stories were just stories. This was real. She needed to get closer. The fence had a hole near the back. Sarah had scoped it out earlier, planning to slip inside for some interior shots once the sun set. Now the hole felt like a trap, like walking into the mouth of something hungry. But the photographer in her won. This was the story of a lifetime. Sarah squeezed through the gap in the chain link. The music got louder, heavier. She could feel it in her bones now, like it was trying to sync with her heartbeat. Her phone buzzed with notifications she ignored. The back entrance hung open. Of course it did. Nothing about this felt random anymore. Inside, the smell hit her first. Copper and rot and something sweet that made her gag. Old medical equipment lined the hallways. Wheelchairs with leather restraints. Machines she couldn't identify. All of it covered in decades of dust and decay. But the walls were what made her stop breathing. Words covered every surface. Scratched into the paint, carved into the drywall, written in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. Treatment with music is successful. Over and over, in different handwriting, different languages. Some of the letters looked fresh. Sarah's camera clicked automatically. She was documenting without thinking now. Survival mode. Get the evidence. Get out. Figure out what it meant later. The music pulled her forward. Each step brought new horrors. A patient room with the door ripped off its hinges. Inside, mannequins arranged in a circle, their plastic faces melted into expressions of agony. Another room filled with old vinyl records, all of them cracked down the middle. The temperature dropped 10 degrees every few feet. This was ghost territory now, paranormal, the kind of scary stories her grandmother used to tell about places where the dead dawn to rest. The main hall opened up ahead. Sarah pressed herself against the wall and peered around the corner. It was worse up close. The dancers weren't just hurting themselves. They were carving symbols into their skin, geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Sacred geometry gone wrong. The wounds bled freely, but nobody seemed to notice the pain. They just kept moving to the relentless beat. The DJ finally lifted his head. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. His face was gone. Not missing, replaced. Where features should have been, speakers had been grafted into the flesh. His mouth opened and closed in rhythm with the bass line. His eyes were holes that pulsed with electric light. Oh God, Sarah breathed. That's when he looked right at her. The music stopped. Every head in the room turned toward her hiding spot. Hundreds of eyes, all of them bleeding, all of them smiling. Sarah ran. Behind her, the music resumed. But now it was different. Hunting music, predatory rhythms that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Her footsteps echoed off the tiles as she sprinted through corridors that didn't to match her memory of the layout. The building was changing around her. She studied enough American horror to know the rules. Dawn, to split up. Dawn, to investigate the noise. Dawn, to trust the helpful stranger. But what was the rule for when the building itself was alive? A door slammed shut ahead of her. Then another. The hospital was hurting her somewhere specific. Sarah pulled out her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Worse, her camera roll was empty. Every photo she'd taken was gone, like none of it had happened. But she could still hear the music, still smell the blood. The hallway ended at a heavy metal door marked, Experimental Wing, Authorized Personnel Only. It stood slightly ajar. Light spilled out from the gap. Not electric light, something older, more organic. Sarah knew she shouldn't to go in. Every survival instinct screamed against it. But the music was getting louder behind her. The dancers were coming, and there was nowhere else to run. She pushed the door open. The room beyond looked like a recording studio crossed with an operating theater. Banks of audio equipment lined the walls. Mixing boards with sliders that moved by themselves. Speakers arranged in patterns that suggested ritual rather than acoustics. In the center, a chair. Leather restraints. Electrodes. Stains that could have been blood or rust or something worse. But it was the walls that made Sarah a sanity fracture. Every surface was covered in photographs. Thousands of them, all showing the same thing from different angles. Different times. Different decades. The rave. Photos dating back to the 1960s showed patients strapped into chairs while music played. Doctors taking notes as their subjects tore at their own flesh. Experiments in sonic manipulation. Frequency-based mind control. Treatment with music. The photos got more recent as her eyes traveled. 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. Patients were placed by volunteers. Volunteers were placed by partygoers. The same expressions of ecstatic agony on every face. And there, in the newest section, photographs of tonight, of her, crouching behind the fence, sneaking through the hole, walking these very hallways. Someone had been watching. Someone had been planning. Sarah spun around to run, but the door was gone. Solid wall where it had been moments before. The music swelled around her, not coming from speakers now but from the building itself. From the walls, from the air, from inside her own head. Her feet started moving without permission. A gentle sway at first, then more insistent. The rhythm was infectious, irresistible. Her hands began to itch. Her fingernails looked suddenly very sharp. In the corner of her vision, she saw her own reflection in a piece of broken equipment. She was smiling. Had been smiling for a while now. Her eyes were already starting to bleed. The photographs on the wall began to move. Not like a movie, like memories, like they were alive and replaying themselves over and over. Decades of the same experiment. The same result. The same success. Treatment with music is successful. Sarah understood now. Century Manor had never been abandoned. It had been waiting. The hospital had found a way to continue its work. To refine its methods. Social media brought the subjects directly to them. Urban explorers. Thrill seekers, photographers looking for the perfect creepypasta. The music therapy had evolved. No more need for restraints or electrodes. Just the right frequency, the right rhythm, the right supernatural resonance with human neural patterns. She raised her hands to her face and began to scratch. Outside, the drone continued recording. Its camera captured everything in perfect 4K resolution. The footage would upload automatically to a server that had been waiting 30 years for new content. By morning, it would be edited. Enhanced, distributed through channels that specialized in viral horror content. The algorithm would push it to users who searched for terms like abandoned hospital and urban exploration and real ghost videos. People just like Sarah, people who thought they were documenting abandoned places, people who would become the next test subjects. The video would be titled, Real Footage. Illegal Rave Goes Wrong at Haunted Psychiatric Hospital. It would have millions of views within a week. The comments would be full of people asking for the location, planning their own visits. Century Manor would never run out of patients again. Sarah danced until dawn, carving new symbols into her skin. Symbols that meant nothing to her conscious mind but everything to the frequency-locked neurons firing in patterns that had been mapped out decades before she was born. By sunrise, she was part of the staff. By sunset, she was helping to plan the next event. The hospital's social media accounts were very good at finding the right audience. Amateur photographers, ghost hunters, true crime podcasts looking for new material. They all received the same cryptic messages, the same hints about Century Manor, the same irresistible suggestion that they should investigate, that they should bring cameras. The supernatural forces that had awakened in Century Manor during its operational years had learned to adapt, to evolve, to use modern technology for ancient purposes. The internet was just another delivery system. Horror content was just another form of advertisement. And there were so many people searching for scary stories. So many Americans hungry for real paranormal encounters. Real creepypasta. Real ghost footage. The hospital would feed them exactly what they wanted. Sarah's last coherent thought, before the music rewrote her personality completely, was a recognition of the perfect trap. Century Manor had turned itself into content, into a meme, into something that spread itself through the very human desire to document the unknown. Every video shared made it stronger. Every view fed its influence. Every comment thread debating the authenticity of the footage brought new potential subjects into its web. It wasn't just a haunted hospital anymore. It was a viral haunting, a digital ghost that could reach through screens and plant suggestions in susceptible minds. The American horror landscape had found its perfect predator. Week after week, new videos appeared, new footage of the rave that never ended. Each one a little different, a little more compelling, a little more shareable. The view counts climbed into the tens of millions. The comment sections filled with people making plans to visit Ontario. And in the depths of Century Manor, the music played on. The dancers carved fresh symbols. The cameras rolled. The treatment continued, because treatment with music is always successful. The only question left was whether Sarah had ever been real at all. Whether any of the visitors had been real. Or if they were all just part of the content now. Digital ghosts performing for an audience that didn't know they were watching their own future. The drone footage never showed faces clearly, never captured details that could be verified, always left just enough doubt to keep people arguing about authenticity in the comments. Keep them engaged, keep them watching, keep them coming. Sarah's photography blog updated regularly now. New posts about urban exploration, about the thrill of discovering abandoned places, about the rush of finding something truly supernatural. Each post included detailed directions to Century Manor. Each post gathered thousands of likes. Each post brought fresh subjects to the experiment. The hospital had learned the most important lesson of the digital age. The best horror stories are the ones that invite participation. The ones that make the audience want to become part of the narrative. Century Manor wasn't just producing content anymore. It was producing believers, and believers always came to investigate, always brought cameras, always stayed to dance. The cycle was perfect, self-sustaining, viral in every sense of the word. Treatment with music is successful. The words appeared in comment sections now, posted by accounts with no profile pictures. No posting history, accounts that existed just long enough to plant the suggestion and then disappeared. But the suggestion remained, and grew, and spread, until half the horror community was talking about Century Manor. Planning trips, organizing group expeditions, live streaming their approaches to the abandoned hospital. None of the live streams ever ended properly. They always cut out just as things got interesting, just as the viewers started to hear the music. But they left enough footage to fuel speculation, to generate reaction videos, to spawn urban legends, to keep the cycle turning. Sarah's final blog post went viral on Halloween. A first-person account of her experience at Century Manor, written in present tense, posted in real time as she allegedly explored the hospital. The post ended mid-sentence. I can hear music coming from the main hall. The dancers are still going. I think I understand now why they can. Stop. The rhythm is in my bones, in my blood. I need to get closer. I need to. And then nothing. The post had 1 million shares by midnight. By New Year, Century Manor was trending on every social platform. By spring, it was a pilgrimage site for horror fans across North America. The hospital had become exactly what it wanted to be, irresistible. And somewhere in the experimental wing, in a room that existed between spaces, Sarah danced to music that had been playing for decades. Her movements perfect. Her timing flawless, her contribution to the ongoing experiment invaluable. She was the star of the show now, the face of the brand, the reason people came looking for real American horror. And she would dance forever, or until the next photographer found their way through the hole in the fence, camera ready, looking for the perfect shot of something supernatural. Something that would make them famous. Something that would make them part of the story. The music never stopped, the treatment was always successful, and there were always more subjects coming. Because in the age of viral content, the scariest stories are the ones that promise to make you famous. Even if fame means dancing until your fingers bleed. Even if it means carving symbols you don't understand. Even if it means becoming content yourself. Century Manor understood the modern world perfectly. Horror was just another form of entertainment. And entertainment always needed fresh performers. The rave would go on forever. Or at least until the internet ran out of people willing to investigate abandoned places with cameras. Which would be never. Treatment with music is successful. The words echoed in frequencies only the dancers could hear. And they danced. And they bled. And they smiled. And somewhere, a drone kept recording. For the next video. For the next upload. For the next group of believers who thought they were hunting ghosts. When all along, the ghosts were hunting them. Story 6. Last shift at Route 66, gas station. Marcus slammed his fist against the ancient cash register. The drawer stuck again. Third time tonight. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like angry wasps, casting sickly shadows across the empty convenience store. Outside, Route 66 stretched into darkness like a black tongue. This was supposed to be his last shift. Tomorrow, he'd drive back to Phoenix. Leave this supernatural nightmare behind. But something felt wrong tonight. Different. The desert wind howled louder than usual, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers. He worked graveyard shifts at this abandoned gas station for 3 months. Never saw another soul after midnight. The owner, Mr. Hendricks, paid cash. No questions asked. Perfect for someone trying to disappear after the divorce papers came through. The radio crackled. Static filled the air. Marcus twisted the dial, searching for a station. Nothing but white noise and distant whispers he couldn't quite make out. He clicked it off. The silence felt heavier than the static. At 2:17 a.m., the knocking started. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Marcus looked up from his horror novel. Through the grimy glass, he saw nothing but empty parking lot and twisted Joshua trees. The security camera monitor showed the same thing. Empty concrete. No cars, no people. He waited, listened. The desert held its breath. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time, more insistent. Marcus grabbed the baseball bat he kept behind the counter. His hands shook as he approached the door. The glass was fogged with condensation, making it impossible to see clearly outside. We closed, he called out. His voice cracked. The knocking stopped. Relief flooded through him. Just the wind. Had to be. Desert wind could play tricks on you. Make you hear things that weren't there. This whole stretch of Route 66 was full of ghost stories and creepypasta legends. Truckers talked about phantom hitchhikers and shadow people. But Marcus didn't believe in that stuff. He returned to the counter. Tried to focus on his book. The words blurred together. His heart still pounded from the adrenaline rush. At 2:43 a.m., the payphone rang. The old rotary phone sat in the corner, covered in dust and spider webs. It hadn't worked in years. The phone company disconnected it before Marcus started working here. Yet now it rang with that sharp, metallic sound that cut through the silence like a scream. Ring, ring, ring. Marcus stared at it. This wasn't possible. The line was dead, cut, gone. But the ringing continued, echoing off the empty walls and making his teeth ache. He approached slowly. Each step felt like walking through quicksand. The ringing grew louder, more urgent. His hand hovered over the receiver. Every instinct screamed at him to leave it alone, to run, to get in his car and drive until the sun came up. But he had to know. Marcus lifted the receiver. Static filled his ear. Then, through the white noise, came a voice. Barely a whisper, cold as winter wind. I am outside, it said. And I am coming in. The line went dead. Marcus dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the receiver spinning on its cord. He ran to the security monitor, rewound the footage, fast-forwarded through empty frames. Nothing. No one had approached the building. The cameras showed every angle, every door, every window. But someone had called. Someone had spoken those words. He checked the locks. Front door, back door, emergency exit. All secure. The windows were painted shut, caked with years of dust and neglect. No way in except through the doors he already checked. Marcus paced behind the counter. Tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a prank. Some local kids with a cell phone, disguising their voice. But how did they make the payphone ring? How did they know he was here? The fluorescent lights flickered. Once, twice, then steady again. At 3:15 a.m., the temperature dropped. It started gradually. A chill that crept up from the floor and settled in his bones. Marcus, his breath began to fog. The windows started condensing, water droplets racing down the glass like tears. He checked the thermostat, 72 degrees, but his fingers were going numb. His teeth chattered. The cold was coming from somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. The freezer. Marcus had avoided the walk-in freezer since his first week. Something about it felt wrong. The temperature gauge always read wrong numbers. Sometimes below zero, sometimes impossibly high. The door would swing open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness and the smell of old meat. Tonight, frost covered the freezer door handle. Ice crystals spread across the metal like reaching fingers. The temperature gauge spun wildly before settling on -40 degrees. Impossible. The freezer hadn't worked in months. A sound came from inside, low and rhythmic, like breathing, or like someone trying to speak through frozen lips. Marcus grabbed his phone. No signal. Of course, this stretch of highway was a dead zone. No cell towers for miles. No help coming. No way to call for backup. He was alone with whatever was in that freezer. The breathing sound grew louder, more distinct, and underneath it, he heard something else. Scratching, like fingernails on metal, like someone trying to claw their way out. Or in. Marcus backed toward the front door, key ready, but as he reached for the deadbolt, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the store. Emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in hellish red. Shadows danced on the walls. The scratching from the freezer became frantic, desperate, and then the door swung open. Nothing came out, but the cold hit him like a physical force. Arctic wind that shouldn't exist in the Arizona desert. It smelled of death and forgotten places, of things that had been buried too long. Marcus fumbled for his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the freezer, its interior. Empty shelves, frost-covered walls, and in the back corner, carved into the ice, "Help me," the letters were fresh. Still dripping, as if someone had just finished scratching them with bleeding fingers. But the freezer had been empty. He checked it himself during inventory. Nothing inside but old rust and broken shelving. The scratching started again. This time, it came from behind him. Marcus spun around. The flashlight beam swept across the store. Empty aisles, dusty shelves. And on the window, written in condensation, "I am inside now," the words appeared as he watched. An invisible finger tracing each letter. The glass fogged and cleared, like someone breathing on it from the other side. But there was no other side, just the empty parking lot and endless desert. Marcus ran for the front door, yanked on the handle, locked, but he had the key in his hand. Where was the key? He searched his pockets frantically. Empty. The key was gone. The back door had to be the back door. He sprinted through the aisles, flashlight beam jumping wildly. Behind him, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, following his exact path. But when he turned around, nothing was there, just his own footprints in the dust. The back door was locked too, deadbolted from the inside. But that was impossible. He hadn't touched this lock since starting his shift. Windows. He could break a window. Get out that way. Marcus grabbed a crowbar from the storage room, raised it to strike the glass. But as the metal touched the window, his reflection stared back at him. Except it wasn't his reflection. The face in the glass was pale, frost-covered, eyes wide with terror, lips blue with cold. It was his face, but wrong. Dead. Frozen. The reflection mouthed words. Too late. Marcus stumbled backward, dropped the crowbar. It clattered across the floor, the sound echoing like gunshots. The temperature plummeted. Ice formed on every surface. His breath came out in thick clouds. Frost covered his eyebrows and hair. The cold was inside him now, in his blood, in his lungs. And he understood this wasn't a ghost story, wasn't some American horror legend about haunted gas stations. This was something else, something that had been waiting, hunting, patient as winter. He heard the stories. Truckers talk about drivers who vanished on this stretch of Route 66. Cars found empty, doors unlocked, engines still running. People who just disappeared without a trace. Now he knew where they went. The freezer door stood open, waiting. The scratching had stopped. In the silence, he heard breathing that wasn't his own. Felt eyes watching from every shadow. Marcus tried to run. His legs wouldn't. He moved. Ice crystals formed on his skin. His joints stiffened. The cold was claiming him, cell by cell, breath by breath. The last thing he saw was his own face reflected in the freezer door. Blue lips trying to form words, trying to warn someone who would never come, trying to scratch a message in the frost that no one would ever read. The morning shift found him 3 days later, frozen solid in the walk-in freezer, door locked from the outside. Security cameras showed nothing, just an empty store and Marcus working his shift, then disappearing between frames. The coroner said he'd been dead for hours, frozen at -40 degrees. But the freezer hadn't worked in months. The temperature gauge read 72 degrees when they found him. The new night clerk started the following week. A young guy from California. Needed quick cash. No questions asked. He noticed the payphone on his first night, covered in dust and spider webs. Disconnected for years, according to the day manager. But at 2:43 a.m., it started ringing. And in the freezer, carved into the frost-covered walls, fresh scratches appeared each morning. Letters that spelled out warnings. Please for help. Names of the missing. Marcus, his name was there now, added to the list, but the scratching never stopped. And every night, when the temperature dropped and the windows fogged with condensation, new words appeared in the glass. I'm still here. The desert wind carried the sound of knocking. 3 sharp raps on glass and metal. Patient as death, hungry as winter, waiting for the next shift to begin.